I mean, even Aristotle claimed that Plato was a known liar.
Right. Sure.
So, I feel like to take that into context of when he's talking about this war between Athens and Atlantis, you can't just throw that out, right? You gotta consider the fact that he was known for creating these lies and these hypothetical
or metaphors,
these philosophical ideas, right?
Sure.
Thought experiments.
But on the other hand, he said he received his information about Atlantis from Solon, who was his grandfather. Mm-hmm. And he says that Solon learned of it from the high priests in Egypt.
Right.
And we actually know where the Atlantis story is recorded in Egypt. It's at Edfu, at the Temple of Horus at Edfu, where it's laid out in the temple walls. It's the building texts at Edfu. And they talk about this great civilization where the gods came from, and that it had collapsed from they depicted as a giant serpent in the sky that came down and destroyed it, mm-hmm. and that they escaped on boats and they fled to Egypt, and then they started setting up Egypt to be a repository of the Atlantean information.
So, do you know the do you know the chain of transmission for the Atlantis story? Like, if we take Plato got it from Socrates, right?
No, Plato got it from his grandfather.
Plato got it from his grandfather? I thought he got it from Socrates.
No, Solon.
Oh, okay.
He got it from Solon, his grandfather.
So Solon was Plato's grandfather?
Correct, yeah. And then he got it from the priests in Egypt.
And then Solon. So how, from the time Plato wrote it down, mm-hmm. how many years was it before Solon told it to him?
Well, I don't know, probably maybe 20 or so. I mean, it wasn't that long. But what's interesting is Plato does place the fall of Atlantis 9,000 years before him, which would have put it exactly.
That was before Athens was even there.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So he said Atlantis existed 9,000 years before, and it had collapsed 9,000 years before him.
Yeah.
So, and that would have put it in Plato's time, that would have put it exactly at the time of the Younger Dryas.
I have this thing. I have it saved somewhere. Let me pull this up because this will be, I think, informative for us to look at. I screenshotted this a while back. I have the, and you can probably confirm how accurate this is. It is basically the chain of transmission of the Atlantis story.
Cool. What's interesting...
It's just hard to remember it.
What's interesting is one of the things that Plato talks about with Atlantis is he says that the colors of Atlantis were black, red, and white. Mm-hmm. And those were also the colors of Egypt, which is why Egypt's flag is black, red, and white.
Interesting.
And those are also the colors of the alchemical process of the transmutations. They go through the changes from black to red to white as you're working them in the lab. Mm-hmm. And those are also the colors of the Templar order. That's why the Templar flag was black and white with a red cross on it. And some people have said to me, well, so from a Templar perspective, the Templar order was really founded to seek out. They understood that there were all these flood stories, right, from all these different cultures that they're encountering. They all had these flood stories.
Yeah.
And they understood that they originally were looking at it from a Noah perspective, like that there had been this civilization that had collapsed from the flood.
Right.
But when they encountered the Druze and the Sabaeans and others who were translating the works of Plato, they came to learn of the Atlantis story. And so they determined that this great civilization of antiquity was probably Atlantis, and that they were trying to find the remnants of Atlantis. They're trying to find the technologies, the philosophies, and the knowledge of Atlantis to rebuild civilization.
Oh.
And that's really what the Templars were doing. Now some have said to me, well, that's just something that you're making up, Tim. But in fact, it's something that's been in our tradition a long time. I first learned of it through the Grand Master before me was a man by the name of Raymond Bernard. And he wrote a book called Secret Meeting in Rome. And this was about his initiation in the Templar Order in, I think it was 1956. And in that, where in his description of his initiation in the Templar Order, he learned about the Templar connection with Atlantis. And he writes about that in his book, Secret Meeting in Rome. So that's where I first learned of it.
And how did he learn about it?
From the Templar Grand Master who was initiating him at the time. Yeah. So
this is the chain of transmission that I'm aware of for the Atlantis story. Okay, so destruction of Atlantis 9,000 years before Solon, right? And this is in the Cretaceous.
Right, correct.
So 9,000 years before Solon is apparently when it was destructed. So from 9,000 years ago, there's an oral history of it for 1,000 years, never written down. Then it is allegedly written down by the Egyptians 8,000 years ago, or 8,000 years before Solon, right? So it's talked about for 1,000 years, only oral, finally written down 1,000 years later. This is in Timaeus. Right. And then, but there's no, we still don't have any writings of this, right?
But there is actually. It's at the Temple of Horus at Edfu.
Okay.
It's on the temple walls.
Okay.
For the building text there.
Okay. So then the priest reads the records,
right?
Which is 1,000 years, or which is how long after? So the priest reads the records, years pass, and then he tells his memory of the records to Solon without consulting the records. Solon tells his relative Drapides. Drapides tells his son Critias the Elder. At age 90, Critias the Elder tells it to his 10-year-old grandson, Critias the Younger. Then Critias the Younger tells it to Socrates. Then 50 years later, Plato writes it down.
Right.
Which is wild. So apparently, okay, so you're saying that it's written down by the Egyptians. Okay, this is saying it's written down allegedly by the Egyptians 8,000 years before Solon, right? After this destruction of Atlantis. And this is in the Edfu texts.
Yeah, so what happened was they had it written down on these parchments that they were passing down for centuries, and then at somewhere along the line decided we better get this like on a temple wall so it's preserved.
And when was that written? When were those Edfu texts written? Do we know?
I'd have to look at when the Temple of Horus was built at Edfu.
Okay.
We'd have to look up when the Temple of Horus at Edfu was built.
Can we look up when the Temple of Horus at Edfu was built? And it was written in the walls?
Yeah, they inscribed it on the temple walls so that it would be preserved. And so you can still see it there to this day. Where it's known as the building text, and it was when they learned how to build in ancient Egypt.
Okay.
And it was from this episode of the gods
200 BC.
So that's when they incorporated it on the walls.
That says when it was built.
Right. When they incorporated it on the walls there.
So they wrote it down.
But it came from these earlier texts, and then they started incorporating.
But we don't have the text.
We don't have the text.
Right.
No, they've crumbled.
We don't. We know. Yeah. So like what the point that thing was making.
There's legends that there's a hall of records underneath the Sphinx.
Yes, I've heard that.
Where all this stuff is preserved.
Yeah.
But,
so just looking at this,
yeah,
it's like, I mean, how serious can we take it when you have this, 1,000 years oral history, then it's like this game of telephone through millennia.
Sure.
And then you have Plato writing it down. He's not a very good.
Well, and I would concede that Plato, he would write things in metaphor.
Yeah.
I mean, he would take. I once was given some good advice that says you need to learn to read. Sometimes you need to read history as myth and myth as history. You have to look at it both ways.
Yeah,
because sometimes there's things that are contained in the. It's like, I mean, there's all kinds of things that are passed down in nursery rhymes or in stories that could just get changed slightly throughout history, but if you take it back to its source, there's some real truth to it. And as far as Atlantis goes, I think part of it was metaphor, for sure. But I think part of it was there's probably something to it.
Maybe.
I mean, the fact that he places the collapse of Atlantis 9,000 years previously
before
to him,
Solon,
which would have put it exactly at the Younger Dryas cataclysm. Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
That's spot on.
That is true.
And that's, I think we have to consider that. So,
yeah, we can. Yeah, I think so too. But like,
now where Atlantis was,
we got a wobbly table still.
Yeah, for sure. I don't believe Atlantis was like an island somewhere.
I think Randall believes it was in the Azores.
Yeah, Randall believes it's in the Azores. There's some Templar traditions that suggest that too. In fact, that's the whole reason why Portugal owns the Azores, right? Because Portugal was founded as a Templar state, right? Exactly. And it was Portugal was founded as a Templar state, and they acquired the Azores. And there's some tradition to say Mount Pico in the Azores was actually the top of a very large mountain where the Atlanteans worshipped. That's just one tradition, though. I mean, I think that if there was an Atlantis, it was more of a worldwide network culture.
Yeah,
more of a worldwide empire, like the British Empire. I mean, you would find if civilization collapsed right as the British Empire was at its peak, you'd find English all over the world.
Yeah.
And there would be a debate about where this empire base was. I mean, and I think it was a similar type of deal.
I think Atlantis. I think if it was real, it's probably still there, and that's where all these UFOs are flying around. They're all coming from Atlantis. It's like this underwater base that they're all going to. Maybe it's run by AI. I don't know. Maybe it's just like still super advanced
under the water.
Yeah,
quite possibly.
I mean, we've explored more of the moon than we have of the oceans. It's there's a lot we don't know about the ocean. We've explored like what? I think it's like 5% of our ocean floors.
Well, the other thing you have to keep in mind, too, is, the Mayans and the Nahuatl cultures of the Americas, they have the same myth of Atlantis, but they call it Aztlan.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that you have Aztlan of the indigenous Maya and Nahuatl cultures called it Aztlan. Plato called it Atlantis. It's pretty much the same word,
And then who took it after Plato? Was it Ignatius Donnelly? Was he the first one to take the ball and run with it after Plato?
Well, he wrote the most authoritative work on it early on, I would say. Donnelly was known for two things. He wrote on Atlantis, and he wrote on the idea that Francis Bacon wrote the Shakespeare plays. Those were the two things he focused on. So, but Donnelly definitely picked it up pretty big, and then then people have been running with it ever since.
Yeah.
So. And Donnelly also believed that it was in the middle of the Atlantic. Other people have suggested it may have been in Antarctica, before it iced over. Some people have even suggested it was the planet Mars, and that there were beings coming over from Mars, and that's the reason why it was described as red, black, and white, because those are the colors of Mars.
Whoa.
And that Mars is about the same size of what Plato was suggesting. I mean, that's a whole nother thing getting out there, but there's different theories on it. I will say that in Egypt, there's also an island called Elephantine Island in the middle of the Nile, and it has a number of things there that shouldn't be there. I mean, first of all, it looks like a bomb went off on the island. I mean, there's huge, 700-ton structures that have just been blown to the side. There's granite, or not granite. I can't think of it, but there's stone buildings that have been blown apart into literally like pieces. And there's speculation that there's an ark that's there to this day. I mean, there's German scientists who've been digging there for decades now, trying to get to it. But but there's other things that they found on the island, including boomerangs, which or they call them magic throwing sticks, which seem to connect some sort of connection between the Egyptians and Australia. And there's also a temple of Tutmosis III on the island, and in the temple they have depicted Mayans meeting with Egyptians.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, very clear.
How can you tell they're Mayans?
Because they have big Mayan headdresses, and they're dressed the same way the Mayans dress.
Really?
And they're trading beads with the Egyptians, and the hieroglyphs talk about the two, that they were brothers on either side of the big body of water.
Wow.
But that suggests that the Egyptians were probably trying to go find, in antiquity, people that they were connected to previously. And the fact that both have the same Atlantis myth.
They both built pyramids.
It suggests that there may be some connection there in antiquity. And the fact that the Mayans have, and not only that, but the Mayans, not only they have the same Atlantis myth, which they just call Aztlan. They say they escaped Aztlan in boats, and fled to the Yucatan where they are now. But they refer to the people of Aztlan as the Itza, which just means like water wizard. So they referred to them as water wizards.
Yeah.
But the fact that they have this whole myth, same myth as Plato talks about, is bizarre. And I'll tell you, even at the if you go to Nakamul, which is the second tallest pyramid in the Mayan world, it's in the Yucatan in Mexico.
What's it called again?
Nakamul.
Nakamul?
Yeah. It's on the very top of the pyramid. There are tridents. And I think that the Mayan also had this figure known as the falling god figure. But his body is in the shape of a trident. And of course the trident was the symbol of Poseidon, who was the god of Atlantis. So there it is.
That's the second biggest pyramid?
Yeah, second tallest pyramid in the Mayan world. Yeah, and at the very top of it, you can't see it, but there's like a little structure on the very top, but on that structure is these trident shapes, right?
Type in tridents after the word, Steve. after the go back, type in Trident.
Yeah, you probably won't.
No, you won't have it on there.
No, no one's allowed up there.
Oh, okay.
I've got some photos of them at one point in time.
Wow, man, you've been everywhere.
Yeah.
You're a world traveler.
But